Welcome back. First Look now returns with our first and major interview of the morning. We are celebrating the United Nations International Day of Democracy today, and we are going to be speaking to the chairman of the Antigua and Barbuda Electoral Commission. He joins us via virtual means this morning. It's Nathaniel "Paddy" James, who joins us as we discuss democracy and the preservation of democracy in Antigua and Barbuda. Mr. James, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and I'm pleased to be with you and the wider audience of ABS radio and television.
All right, so let's start with the mandate of the Antigua and Barbuda Electoral Commission, to which we refer to as Abec hereafter. What's Abec really been charged to do, in your own words?
Yeah, the Electoral Commission of Antigua and Barbuda is responsible for the conduct of elections in Antigua and Barbuda. That is, we are responsible to ensure that persons return to the Parliament of Antigua at the end of the life of any parliament, go there with some measure of proper electoral management to ensure that fairness and equity is observed in that process. And that is the major part of the Electoral Commission's mandate to the people of Antigua and Barbuda. Free and fair election.
Great. Apart from registration, which seems to be a major and well-known mandate of the commissions, what else in terms of those regular practices are you responsible for?
Yes. As you know, election democracy is an important part of the whole process of governance in most Commonwealth countries, OAS, and in the wider Latin America, of which, wider Americas, of which we are a part. And so we, part of our mandate and duty is to observe elections on almost every corner of the world, Commonwealth, the OAS, Latin America, Caribbean. That's part of our mandate. So almost every month, someone from the Electoral Commission goes to one of these places to observe and to impart transfer of ideas and to learn from those processes to improve our own process here. So that's part of our mandate also.
And every discussion, Mr. James, about democracy seems to descend into a conversation, or sometimes an argument, about party politics. So talk to us about the constituents of the Electoral Commission and how they are selected, because most will think that the Commission reflects the will of the party in power at the end of the day. Talk to us about that, if you would.
Okay, governance in Antigua is an inescapable fact that surrounds politics. And so those who are in charge of the country, the politician, if you may, both divide, opposition and government, are part of the process of selecting persons to serve on the Electoral Commission. And in recent time, it was widened to bring in the commercial sector, the church, and so forth. So in fact, persons who serve on the Electoral Commission principally are selected from not only the divide of the body politics in Antigua, but also it entails representation from the church and also from the commercial community.
And Mr. James, the literature would widely reflect that somehow in the past Antiguan elections have been embroiled with some sort of controversy. What are we doing to ensure that future elections, that we ensure that they are fair, that they are transparent, and as you would have said earlier, they reflect the will of the people? What measures are we putting in place to ensure that that happens?
Well, the elections since adult suffrage in 1951 have been, in my view, have been fairly recognized to be fair. Even some people have their own different views. But from 2001, from 1975 there was an enactment referred to as the Representation of the People's Act. And that took us right up until independence. And in post-independence, somewhere around 2001, we reformed the system to include an electoral commission. And prior to that, elections were conducted by a single person, the supervisor of election. And the international community felt that that was not a proper process. And so they pressured the former Prime Minister, God bless his soul,
Phillister Bird.
Phillister Bird.
That's right.
And he instituted a reform process which allow us to have perhaps and a claim to be one of the best electoral systems within the Commonwealth. Indeed, one will recall that this system was developed from 2001, and we made our best approach in conducting election at the last general election, which was proclaimed to be the best election run in the Commonwealth within the last whatever, since adult suffrage in 1951. Antigua claimed to have run the best election in the Commonwealth since adult suffrage in 1951. And that brings a certain amount of respectability to the electoral process. And so every area of democracy in the world today, whenever you're having an election, somebody from the Antigua and Barbuda Electoral Commission is present because of the respect that the world community, and I think all people should understand, that we are very well respected in the Commonwealth and other places, Latin America, where to be very much involved in ensuring that proper, prudent, and fair election is conducted as part of the democratic process throughout the free world.
That claim, Mr. James, it came from Commonwealth, OAS, CARICOM. Where did that claim come from in terms of having the best run election anywhere in the Commonwealth? Can you remember?
Well, it has been said publicly by those who are involved in the process, both at Commonwealth level and OAS and everywhere. I have had that
feedback.
That feedback.
Okay, let's move on to your thoughts on moving forward in voting, on the process of voting. What are your impressions on electronic voting, mail-in ballots, those that exist in other territories, in other jurisdictions? Do you think we'd get there? Is it something that we should aspire to?
Well, look, this is a third world country with limited resources. And while it is true that it would curtail some measure of expenditure as it relates to fiscal policy of governments especially in these third world countries or small economies, micro economies. It would help. The fact remains that the electronic process of voting, because of the fact that we have not yet developed our platform for these circumstances. That's one of the problems we are facing right now in our system. Just collecting our data with computer and so forth is a real setback to a number of issues we face from time to time. So I would not at this juncture encourage our country until we can realize a stable platform to do that. I would continue to advocate that we continue in the process which we actually vote by way of manual voting rather than electronic voting. Because I've seen that in Latin America and so on, which they tried, and it doesn't seem to work very well because of the platform.
But what about mail-in ballots for those people who are undesirable or unable to leave their homes in terms of mailing in their ballots? Trust in the postal system here or some of the means of getting those ballots in?
Well, it also has to do in my view, with how our people consider the voting process as to whether our people will feel very comfortable to have those circumstances ensued, since they may have their own feelings in terms of the integrity of that process. So that is something that would have to take some time to develop. So I'll say again, at this juncture, I would prefer to stay away from those processes until we have developed certain aspect of our electoral process to encourage our people to accept these things. They can't just go in and just, introduce them because other places are doing it. I don't think our people have would readily accept that at this juncture.
All right, we can't conclude this conversation without some mention of COVID-19, Mr. James. Tomorrow, Bahamas looks forward to their elections. The Prime Minister there would have initially said that those who had tested positive for COVID-19 would not be able to vote because they would pose a threat to the rest of the population by going into the ballot centres. Of course, he's since relented, and they will allow, under special circumstances, those people to go. Now, in Antigua and Barbuda, our next election is constitutionally due in or before 2023, if I remember correctly. COVID-19 certainly will be a real feature, even then, even if not in its current state. Has there been any thought given to what would happen should we have a general elections in the midst of COVID-19? What will we do then?
Well, protocol set, and the whole aspect of the health of the nation comes first before anything. So in my view, if persons are, have COVID-19, which spread and cause serious illness and death, my view is that is something that the executive arm, the government, the parliament itself, will have to review and look seriously at. I cannot make any prediction what the Antigua government will do and say here at this time that I would not support it, depending on the circumstances. One thing I would say here, that because of what is going on presently, I would say, on the face of it, I don't think we should go down that road. If you have COVID-19, you should stay away from the rest of the population. How it's going to be done, or how the government of the day decide to do it, if it's comport with public policy and it can fit in, I am prepared to support anything which the government decide to do in relation to keeping the people safe.
Yes, and a major part, our final question, a major part of democracy, of course, is freedom of speech, but of course, being responsible with that speech. Antigua and Barbuda seems to have, descended into a talk as you like mentality. What are your thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, well, you see, there is something, and I would like to say this, that in every democracy, there are limitations on all of us, even in times, in good times. I don't have the right to necessarily say things about another person to bring that person to odium and contempt. Neither do I have the right, if I'm sick, have a dreaded disease, to go around and infect people, or in any aspect of the guaranteed democratic rights that you have. You must always have regard for the right of other persons. And where there is, and that's the point I would like to make, where there is a state of emergency, it goes with certain amount of curtailing of one's constitutional right. It's called act of necessity. And so where you have a state of emergency, I want to make that clear, the government of the day has the right to act in a manner which provide principally the curtailing of rights to save the rights of other people. And so act of necessity in these circumstances would allow the state to curtail the rights of persons in terms of speech, if necessary, if that speech is going to bring threaten the democratic free system of governance, the movement of people, depending on the circumstances, they're all part of act of necessity. And so one of the things that Antiguans must understand, you don't have a right, because it's guaranteed under the Constitution, to behave in a particular way because you have that right, because that right can be curtailed for the good of all. And that's the point I would like to make.
And an excellent point at which to end this interview. Mr. James, I want to say thanks for so graciously accepting our invitation to appear with us this morning. We really enjoyed this conversation with you. And congrats on all the work you've been doing at the Commission, and give our regards to the rest of your board and to the rest of the team there at Abec.
And thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome, sir. So Nathaniel Paddy James there, who is the chairman of the Antigua and Barbuda Electoral Commission, joined us for our very first interview right here in Antigua and Barbuda today as we commemorate the United Nations International Day of Democracy. We'll take a break, come back to so much more here, including a top of the hour headlines before we head into our second hour. Stay with us.